Hello everybody and welcome. I hope you're all doing very well. This video will serve as a briefing package for the upcoming Danair Virtual Landing Challenge event. I hope you're all as excited to participate in it as much as we have been creating it. After announcing it a few days ago though, in the run-up to the actual start of the event, which will be the day after tomorrow, we have realized that many of you might be unfamiliar with some of these destinations, so we thought it would be a good idea to provide a little bit of guidance to help you familiarize yourselves with the locations, the charts, and the different approaches available in order to give you a better fighting chance. This will therefore be a familiarization tutorial and will not go into details in how to set up your aircraft to perform these approaches, as the whole Danair virtual fleet will be available for you to use. Now, I would therefore strongly recommend that you fly this event in an aircraft that you're fully confident flying, especially with regards to auto-flight operation and navigation. Now, one further recommendation is to always plan for abundant extra fuel for these flights, factoring in at least a couple of missed approaches. Around, I would say, an hour of extra fuel should suffice. Many of these destinations have complicated, visually hand-flown final approaches, which in real life would never be performed without having familiarized yourselves with the location, with the guidance of a senior captain in advance. Therefore, be ready to expect some less than perfect short finals. Now remember, the landing limits that Pegasus imposes will still be relevant, no matter how tricky the final maneuvers are, so I strongly suggest for you to be ready to go around if things do not look stable just before landing. If you see 4 white puppies, go around. If you're not aligned correctly with the runway, go around. If you're way too fast, go around. In order to be prepared for this eventuality, I would prompt everybody to brief your missed approach techniques while descending. Not only how the missed approach is charted, but also the go around actions, as in talk at power, flaps up 1, follow flight directors, positive rate, gear up, engage autopilot, engage nav, and etc. depending on the plane that you're flying. These videos includes all event, or this video one includes all the event airports, but of course it's not intended to be watched in one go. You have timestamps with every single airport, so you can watch one at a time when and if you need it, and the order I've put them in will be the same I will be using to fly the tour myself. But it's now time to jump in and start with the first one: Lima, India, Romeo, Alpha, Rome, Ciampino in Italy. Now, Ciampino Airport is situated 12 kilometers southeast of central Rome, just outside the Greater Ring Road, so the circular motorway around the city. Ciampino Airport was opened in 1916, is one of the oldest airports still in operation. It was Rome's main airport until 1960, with traffic amounting to over 2 million passengers per year. Since the opening of the newer Leonardo da Vinci Airport, though, Ciampino has been handling almost exclusively charter and executive flight. After decades of stagnation, though, in scheduled traffic, low-cost carriers have boosted Ciampino, and it is now one of the busiest and fastest growing airports in Italy. So the location, as we said, just outside of Rome. This is what lies around Ciampino. Let's have a look from above. There we go. Now, this is Ciampino seen from above, and it's quite particular as a relatively short runway. It has a fair downslope, or well, upslope, depending on where you approach. Now, the preferred approach will be, of course, as you can see, based on the terrain, runway 15. It's nice and flat on that side, but that would defeat the whole point of the landing challenge, would it? So what we're going to do, the other approach, the approach to runway 33, which comes from this side. As you can see, there's a big mountain over there and a massive crater. Actually, I haven't looked what caused that crater, but don't know if it's volcanic or a meteor, but that is the problem, the topography around the airport. So there are no approaches straight into runway 33, but there is a visual procedure, so there's a very large offset approach to runway 33, and then a last procedural turn. Now let's have a look at the chart. Over here you can see the topography around the airport. No problem approaching from the northwest, but of course it's a little bit tricky approaching from the southeast. Now if you do the flights the way I'm doing it, you will be approaching from the south, as I have planned to come from Lima India Charlie Romeo, which is Reggio Calabria. Now that would be the first flight. We will be coming in from the south. Now you can choose initially choose a star as it suits. First choose the approach you want to do and then choose a relevant star. The approach can be a circling RMP A to runway 33 or a circling VOR A runway 33. So first of all, decide if you're doing an RMP or a VOR, and of course that's based on the type of aircraft that you're flying. They are practically identical. They're identical in regards to where they take you, because then the circling approach is exactly the same for both initial approach. So whether it's the RMP, the RNAV, or the VOR, it doesn't really matter. The approach point will be the same. You can either come, if you're coming from the north, via the Roma VOR, so you'll be coming to the Roma VOR and then do a procedure this way. You can then come from Hydrox if you're coming from the south, from Latina VOR from the southeast, and then from Frosinone VOR if you're coming from the east. All these approaches, they take you anyway to this point over here, 10 DME from the Rome VOR, or from to the ICIA ILS. Now what you're going to do is quite simple. You're going to come down the approach, commence the approach at 10 DME. You're going to be at 3,000 feet. Now all these approaches are non-precision approaches, so the one thing that I will bring up quite a lot is the fact that all these non-precision approaches need to be early decelerated, early stabilized approach. So they're not going to be a decelerated approach where traditionally you set yourself on the glide slope at your flaps 1 or flaps 5, and then you put down the flaps and you decelerate as you're going down the approach, but they will be early stabilized approaches. So at your final approach point, you want to be already at flaps, the second to last setting. So let's say flaps 3 for an Airbus, so flaps even more than 15 for a Boeing, and gear down, and then you can put down the last notch of flap as you go down. Now, considering there is a single pilot environment, I would suggest being fully configured before the final approach point, so you don't need to worry about too many things. Get your lights on, get your flaps full out, and arm your speed brake. Do everything you can, because then it will be very much involved the last part of the approach. So in this case, you're coming down at 3,000 feet at 10 DME from Rome, so you can have definitely need to have your VOR tuned. You can go, I believe here, you can go down the ILS, because there's an ILS at 3. There is an ILS there. So you can go down the ILS, but it's no fun in that. It's probably better just to go down manually. Make sure you start your descent at 7.7 DME from the Rome VOR. You need to come down at a descent angle of 3.5, so 3.5 degrees. So on the Airbus, very simple. You set your FPA. You set your FPA at minus 3.5, and then 0.3 miles before the final descent point, you pull your vertical speed knob and you start the descent at 3.5. If you're doing it on a Boeing, you set the descent in feet per minute based on your speed. So if your final approach speed is around 140, you come down at minus 867 feet per minute. You start coming down, and then over here you will switch at the end. Well, here you need to level off. at the circling minima, which for the VOR is 1350 and for the RMP is 1470. So as you're coming down, you stop your descent at the minima, and then you switch to your circling RMP, so the chart 23-3 alpha. What you're gonna do at 4 DME from the Rome VOR, you're gonna want to set your heading. You can do this all in autopilot, so set your heading to 008 and you start deviating from the ILS path, of course, because otherwise you will end up over here and you will not land. So turn right towards 008 until 2.5 DME, and at that point you can intercept the extended center line to the runway. The way you descend from here to the runway depends on your visual picture outside the window, so you should be able to identify the puppies and just follow the guidance with the puppies. If you want a more in-depth tutorial, you can head over to my channel, and I have made a full tutorial. Of course, you can skip all the flight phase and etc. Just go to the there is a timestamp in the description. Just go to the approach and you can see how the approach is performed, and that was in the A319 or A321. It was in the Tolis anyway. And that is it for Ciampino. A few things to look for. Be careful. Of course, the final turn will be complicated. You don't have any, you know, your first officer looking out the window for you, so you'll need to be careful there. Make sure you're fully configured, and then be careful because over here that runway actually has a pretty severe downslope. So you're going from the 427 to 341, so you're losing 80 feet in, well, 7,000 feet, more than 1 degree, 1% downslope. So of course it's a little bit difficult, it's a little bit tricky. You risk very much floating for quite a while. And bear in mind, there is a relatively short runway with 2.2 kilometers. Okay, and that is it for Ciampino. I think pretty straightforward, not many options, there's only one approach, and well, I hope you'll enjoy that. Okay, so just a visual recap of the approach. You will be flying this way towards the far end of the runway, and at a certain point you will break off to the right. You will need to be, the tricky thing I found about this approach, and you will need to be lower than you expect, or especially onto these buildings over here, because here you're coming down from the slope of the mountain, so it doesn't look like, but there is quite a pronounced downslope here, so you will need to be relatively low. We can see the puppies here. Here there's 2 white and 2 red, and look, we're very low on this building. So when you perform the turn, make sure that you are low enough, otherwise you won't be stable on final. And then you'll keep going down, and there we are. The next airport is going to be Corfu International Airport, a very famous airport in Greece, on the Greek island of Corfu, so not too far from where we started. Now, Corfu is a very popular holiday destination, so a lot of traffic in summer coming from, well, anywhere in Europe really. And the particular thing of this airport is that it's situated over here on a relatively small island. And this is, we're looking up north this way, and that's pretty much similar to Rome. There's a problem with the topography of the area. So on the south side of the airport, as you can see, it's pretty flat. You're over sea, apart from those little mountains on our right, but it's a pretty straightforward approach. on the other side, on the north side, there is terrain pretty close to the airports. So there's actually no chartered approaches from the north. All the chartered approaches are from the south. As you can see over here, these are all the approaches, RNAV, and a plethora of VOR approaches from the south. So that's what you normally would do. Now, if you were to have to land on the opposite runway, you would need to do a circle to land. So if you were coming from the south, you do a traditional circle to land. You start going down your cloud slope, and then at the circling minima, 2,000 feet, you arrest your descent. Then you break off 45 degrees for 30 seconds, and then you continue your downwind, and then you perform your turn. But if you're coming from the west and from the south, or from the northwest, there's no point going all the way down. I found online this isn't charted. Only the initial part of this approach is charted, which is a bit weird, because when you come here and you have a look at these two VOR approaches, it said, okay, VOR approach takes me onto the VOR on top of the airport from the side, and then what? So the way to fly this approach, I found it online. It was actually Classic Prune Forum, so a forum of real pilots, and it could have probably been somebody from Aegean themselves, I don't know, but they explained the whole procedure, how it's done. It's practically just a variation of a circle to land. Now, traditionally, as we said, when you do a circle to land, you go down your traditional approach that you have here, you stop at the circle to land, you break off to 45 degrees for 30 seconds, then you start your downwind leg, and once you are abeam the threshold, you start the timer, and you keep flying out for 3 seconds every 100 feet of elevation that you need to lose. In this case, the minima is 1,900, so 1,900 feet. You multiply that by 3, so 57, and you fly outbound for 57 seconds. After 57 seconds, you turn base, you turn final, you start your descent, and you go visual. Now, coming from the side, that throws a little bit of a spanner in the works. First of all, because the turn is a little bit trickier, and then also we have terrain there, so we cannot really fly a full minute that way, because it will be too close to terrain. So how is this approach performed? You come either from the VOR A or VOR B. The only difference is the missed approach procedure, so it doesn't really matter too much. You're coming from VMAT. At VMAT, you're at 4,000 feet. Remember to check your QNH for all non-visual approaches to make sure that you are the correct altitude. VMAT at 4,000. Start putting your flaps 1, your first notch of flap down. Descend to 2,800 by 10 DME Garizza, so the Golf Alpha Romeo VOR that you need to have tuned. Then from 10 DME, you descend further in the next 10 nautical miles to 1,900 feet. Make sure, again, that you are early stabilized. So you make sure that at this point, you've already been putting down your gear down and your full flaps just before the VOR, to make sure that you are at the final approach speed before the VOR, because you need to start the timer and fly based on timer. So it's better if you have the same speed for the whole procedure. So what you're going to do, you're going to fly onto the VOR, waiting until you are on top of the VOR, which coincides with the runway. So wait until you're on top of the VOR on the runway, so you can see outside the window, and you will see your VOR needle spinning once you're on top. At that point, you time 10 seconds on the same heading. So you can start this on lock, on autopilot VOR mode, with a inbound course of 77 degrees on the VOR 108.8. Switch to heading just before, otherwise the autopilot will get confused with the VOR needle spinning. Continue on that heading for 10 seconds. After 10 seconds, you perform a left turn onto downwind with a heading of 345 degrees. So you overfly 10 seconds, then you turn left 345. Once your wing levels, you start your timer. So as we said, traditionally for a circle to land from 1,900 feet, it will be 57 seconds. But in this procedure, we fly out only 30 seconds. And then we turn with 20 to 25 degrees on bank, depend on your speed, and depends as well on the wind. It could be anything between 20 and 30 degrees for the final turn. Now, normally you would fly out for 57 seconds and then turn around and start a descent, but you don't have all that time. You have only 30 seconds. So you will need to start descending pretty much as soon as you start the downwind leg. Well, if the math is correct, you should start around 3-4 seconds after you start your 30 seconds timer. You start already to descend. But let's see how it looks from up here. Now you will be here to the west. You will be approaching the airport this way, and you will be at your 1,900 feet. So what we're gonna do, we're gonna fly onto the VOR. Once we are above the airport, we start 10 seconds. Count 10 seconds. And then we turn, heading 345, roundabout towards those mountains. We start the timer now, 30 seconds. After 3, we start our descent at 3 degrees. At the end of the 30 seconds timer, we turn, start our turn. You should be turning round about here, just in time to see the actual harbor here, and then you'll be on final and continue your descent like this. There we are. Once again, I have a full tutorial. Feel free to have a look at the approach phase of my tutorial into Corfu to have an idea of exactly how to perform it. For the next approach, we are in Samos, another Greek island, very famous touristic destination, in a very, very unique airport. Another very famous approach. It is flown by fairly modern airlines. There's TUI that takes even Boeing 737 MAX in here. You have A320, so it's perfectly doable in a modern airline, and a slightly larger one as well. But it has a very particular procedure. Now, Samos is an island just off the coast of Turkey, very, very close to Turkey. And a particular thing of this airport, as you can see, again, a similar situation to other airports on islands, it has terrain pretty much on 3 sides. So that makes it fairly difficult. Now, very unique of this airport is that there isn't much in terms of charts. So if you have a look here, approach, there's only VOR, DME, and NDB, and they look practically identical. One is, it's a classic procedural turn, and one is based on the NDB, one is based on the VOR. So what are we gonna do to come here? Now we will be flying from any point, anywhere, and we want to end up at the Samos VOR, so 111.6. From the Samos VOR, we'll do a classic procedure, so we're flying outbound from the VOR on a radial of 160 at a certain DME here, DME 9. We turn around and we fly an inbound course of 358. But then it doesn't tell you what to do next. There's no chart. What are we going to do? You don't find charts published on Navigraph, but you can find a chart online. If you simply Google Samos approach charts, you will find it, and I will show it to you in a second. So the way you start the approach, come to the VOR. There will probably be some speed constraint at the VOR, but make sure that at the VOR you're already flaps 1, because from the VOR, where you will be at 6,000 feet, you need to descend to 3,000 feet, and that's only 9 miles. So actually, Well, I would probably say even more than flaps 1. Well, first notch of flap, again, flaps 5 and flaps 1 before the VOR, I would say. And then after passing the VOR on your outbound leg, putting flaps 2 or flaps 15, gear down and start descending and slow it down. Again, it doesn't hurt to be stabilized at your final approach speed a little earlier. Also, we're in the sim, we're not paying for fuel, we don't get in trouble if you make too much noise, so it's better to be ready and prepared in advance. So ideally, before getting to the turn, we will be already stabilized at 3,000 feet on our V-up. We'll perform the turn. If you're on the Airbus, or well, again, anything with an FMS, the turn will be automatic. It will fly all the way back to the VOR on its own, but we will not be getting to the VOR. So what we do after the turn, we start descending back from when you finish the turn, you start descending to your MDA, which will be 1880. We level off at 1880, and then we follow the chart that I will show you in a second. Just over here, and we have a look at this chart. So as you turn down, as you can see, gear down, flaps 1520. I would possibly do it even a little earlier than that. Once again, a single pilot environment, so it's better to get all those things down. Flaps, arm the spoilers, the lights, so then you can focus. Definitely after this point, you won't be able to do anything else at all, so make sure you're absolutely ready. Altitude 1850, well, the minimum was 1880. Same thing, 30 feet doesn't make a big difference. Now here at 4, so you will have these tuned because you're doing this procedure. Make sure you hard tune it if you use the FMS so you don't lose it, whatever happens. Monitor the DME distance from the VOR Samos, and then for DME, so 4 miles before the VOR you turn, I would suggest it's definitely a lot nicer the left procedure, so the procedure landing from west, and that's the classic white shed, the famous white shed approach. So for DME, turn heading 325. Make sure you don't overshoot this, because if you start the turn when the DME indicates 4, especially if you're in a slightly faster plane, you might end up overshooting. If you overshoot and then you parallel this and you're on the inside, then this turn will be way too tight and you won't be able to perform it. So I would potentially recommend to start the turn when you're 4.2 to 4.3 DME. You start heading 325. You're gonna head towards a village with a pier. You will need to start descending straight away, because here you're a 1850. At the village with a pier, we're gonna have to be a 1100, and then you continue until you crossed the radial 240. So make sure that you set up your plane to do that. I would suggest, as you're coming down towards the VOR on the course 359, shortly before this, let's say at 60 ME, you select heading and you continue on the same heading, but then you change the course of the VOR from 359 to 240, and so that once you go with the turn, at this point you have everything set up. You just need to monitor the needle. Once you pass the radial 240, you can start the turn and overfly over the shed. And Abim, the village, you need to be at 900 feet. So 1850, 1100, 900 feet. You keep coming down. You keep coming down at 3 degrees. Now let's have a look in the sim how it looks. So let's go that way. So we will come down from here, roundabout, headed. There we are. Let's see, the pictures outside should look, yeah, roundabout like that. So you will be heading that way, 1850, roundabout there. We're flying this way at 4 dmi, a little earlier than that. We start turning towards that way. We can see here the village with the pier. So we descend at around 1100 feet here by the village with the pier. We continue towards the mountain. And then once we cross that radial 240, I'll be in this little village over here, where we'll be at 900 feet. We start our turn. Now it will be difficult again because it's the right turn, and we'll most likely be sitting on the left hand side, but the shed will be a good indication. We don't necessarily need to see the runway because it's quite simple over here. When you turn, when you start, you continue the turn, you continue descending down. If out the window you see at this point the shed in front of you, it means you pretty much undershot it and you're good and you can recover. Ideally, you will want to see the shed coming just in front of you. So if the shed is over there, this big white shed, it means you're really good and you're aligned perfectly. You just can continue the turn and land. If during the turn you never see the shed, let's say you're flying this way and you see trees, 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 and more trees, and you never see the shed, it means you overshot it. Don't even think about landing. No point. You won't be able to correct it, or you will, but you will be unstable and smashing down and invalidate the P-rep, and we don't want that. Just go around, continue heading out at sea. To do a go around, you just continue on the heading of the runway, and then you turn out to sea and you go and do the whole procedure again. And this is Samos. Now for the next airport, we are still in the Mediterranean, like, well, most of our challenging airports, in Montenegro, and this is Tivat. Yeah, again, another famous airport for a nice challenging approach. A few people have done tutorials in the past. You have, of course, 320 Simpilot has an approach tutorial for Tivat, and as well, Katie Pilot flew here. I'm pretty sure many others. Now, once again, terrain is the particular thing around this airport. So, as you can see there, you cannot really come from the north. So here we're looking north, and there's a lot of terrain over there. Now I say you cannot come from the north, but actually there is one crazy approach that ATC made me do here once, which is coming down from those mountains over there, coming down into the bay, and then turning for a short final onto there. But that is a little bit too adventurous. It's not charted at all. Just a completely, I don't know, visual. Even the controller on VATSIM and only watched the video about it and just found some indication of a forum. But you have charted approaches here, so it's definitely better to do that. Now, having a look at the chart, so traditionally you will be coming in from the south. As you can see, runway heading here, we're on to the mountains. So all the charted approaches are offset. They come down here where the terrain is lower and then turn on to final. So as a result, all you have are localizer or NDB approaches. The essence is the same. You come down over here with the localizer, which is offset, and then break off for a visual element just before the runway. You break off normally at 3 DME from the localizer. Now the circle to land is not a standard circle to land. It has prescribed tracks because, of course, you don't have an approach that goes out to the runway, so you cannot do a standard circle to land. If you have a look here, you have circle to land with flight tracks, or another circle to land with flight tracks. I believe 320 Simpilot covered this one, where you overfly this terrain over here. So you start from the NDB over here, and then you descend to 1840, which is for category C, which is pretty much all the planes that we will be flying with Danair Virtual at 1840, and then continue with this procedure. Or you can do this one over here, which breaks off after and avoids this terrain over here. So you establish yourself on the localizer, so you put in the FMS the localizer Z or localizer Y for runway 32. You're gonna have to descend manually once again at TAS NDB. That's your platform altitude, 2,600 feet, and then from TAS NDB you start your 3.2 degrees glide slope. Now what you're gonna do, you're gonna fly that, whether it's FBA or vertical speed, however you want, depending on the plane. Make sure that before the TAS NDB you're again fully configured with gear down at your final approach speed. Start your descent, stay on the localizer, and then at 3.2, no, sorry, at 3 miles, no, not this one, at 3 DME from the localizer, you turn heading 295, track or heading 295. You fly out, you keep this localizer tuned, you fly out until you're very close to terrain there, and you're at 3 DME again. It would be probably handy if you can to draw a 3 DME, a circle on your fixed info page if you have it. If you're flying the 737, if you're flying the A320 or the A320 series, make sure you draw a fixed info on the fixed info page, a circle of 3 miles around the TIV localizer, so you have that, you have when you need to break off and when you need to straighten. So 295 all the way there, you're gonna be at 1840. So as you come down the localizer, you level off at 1840, 3 DME, turn heading 295 until your DME reading is again 3 miles and before the terrain, and at which point you turn heading 314 for 1.5 miles. Again, you will have the DME reading, so you're good. You can just keep checking the DME reading, and at that point you start your turn and your descent. Okay, pretty straightforward. It's visual. The only difficult thing is that it's a right turn. Most of us fly from the captain seat, from the left hand side, so it's a little bit tricky to monitor your descent and to check the puppies. On this one, again, it would be useful probably to try it once and then to go around if you don't get the descent correct. But on 320 Sim Pilot's tutorial, you should be able to see how he handles the descent onto the runway. Now let's see anything interesting over here. The runway is 2,500 meters, so that shouldn't be a big problem. It's plenty of runway for pretty much any of the aircraft we fly. So once again, let's have a look at it over here, how it's going to be. So we will be coming from that side. There we go. Let's try and speed up. Don't know exactly where the localizer is, but basically we will be flying this way. Now we go down on the localizer, we will be descending. We will arrest our descent at 1840. Yeah, we passed the terrain over here. So descend, stop at 1840, and at 3 DME we start our turn left. Heading 325, we fly out, leveled off at 1840, just before this bridge. When the DME is again 3 DME, we turn, as the chart says, here, over here, 314, keep heading 314, and at 4 DME, we start our turn. And we descend. And we're on to final. There we go. And that's Tivat in Montenegro. Here we are. Next approach is going to be Reggio Calabria in the south of Italy. Reggio Calabria is named the Kai Tak of Italy because it has a very similar approach. So you're going down an ILS, a localizer, a glide slope, and then you have a final turn with light guidance. Now, I've now seen that I have I thought I had installed the payware scenery. There is definitely a payware scenery, and I'm pretty sure it does simulate the lights, because the leading lights make a huge difference to the way you fly the approach, because there's not many visual references apart from the lights. You can pretty much follow the coast, but it's not as simple. So if you have the payware for either X-Plane 11 or Microsoft Flight Simulator, you will get the guidance of the leading lights that make it a lot easier. Now, the way this works, regardless of what you're coming, you start this localizer A approach. So either you're coming from the north, well, in this case, the way I planned it again is to come from the north, from Tivat, from Montenegro, so I can join the full procedure over here. You will be flying onto Reggio Calabria VOR. There's a speed constraint there, so you'll be already there at flaps 1, I believe, or well, first notch of flaps, below 200 knots, as you have max 200 knots on this outbound. This will be flown in LNAV, or in nav mode, as it's all programmed in the FMS. You will be going out at maximum 200 knots. At this point here, you start putting full flaps and gear down on your turn, and then you're inbound the localizer. So the localizer signal is here, very much offset from the airport. So you're flying onto that, read the chart, you start your descent at 8.1 DME from the Reggio Calabria VOR. That you can straight away see there's a slightly tricky thing here, and I've made a mistake in the past. Now, you are on the localizer, which is the 109.3, well, Romeo Echo Golf, which is Reggio, but you are basing your procedure on the VOR, so make sure that you have tuned the localizer for your guidance, but then you have the VOR for your DME. As you can see here, RCA, VOR, DME required, because this localizer doesn't give you DME. Okay, so you start this descent at 8.1 from Reggio Calabria, going down on a 3.5 degrees glide path. You go down all the way, and this is very much like Kai Tak. So when you comes to the missed approach altitude, you stop at 1630, but in this case you do not stop, you just continue descending at 1630. You just need to deactivate your autopilot, you need to be visual with the runway, and then you continue on the same heading. And well, if you have the leading lights, you just make sure you fly on top of the leading lights, otherwise you'll need to eyeball it, which is fairly complicated. Now, the airport itself, you're landing on runway 33, 2000, just a little bit more than 2000 meters, so not the longest runway. So make sure you don't float, you don't overshoot, and etc. The way it's going to look, let's see from here. Let's go and have a look around. As you can see, the airport is over here. Once again, very easy approach coming from the north, but from the south, less so. There's a lot of terrain, which is of course a common theme in all these landing challenges that we are doing. Now, if you do everything correct, let's have a look at the charts. So you're basically flying down the coast like that. and you'll be turning around at a certain point. You will do your turn over here, and then you will be coming down pretty much like this. Let's have a look. Coming down in line with the beach. Yep, down like this. So you're here, coming down, roundabout, let's see. Yeah, roundabout at this point, you will be disconnecting the autopilot. Continue flying towards terrain. Again, here you're gonna be very low to terrain. Do not be scared. Make sure you're low at this point, and then you turn on to final and come down. There we go. No leading lights on the default. I'm pretty sure I had installed the payware. But otherwise you can just try a couple of times. Shouldn't be too much of a problem. There is as well a tutorial on my channel on how to perform this approach. So if you want to have a look, I did this in the Toolis, I believe. So you can have a look at this one. Here we are in Skiathos, our next airport. Now Skiathos, well, yet again, another Greek island. You guessed it. Greece being, of course, a treasure trove for very interesting old-fashioned NDB, VOR approaches, and you name it. Skiathos, very famous. You will find tutorials on Skiathos anywhere. You open a random YouTube page, probably will be a tutorial on how to land into Skiathos. Now, very interesting in flying into Skiathos. Now this is a payware airport again, so it gives a little bit more detail at the airport. It's a tiny little island, Skiathos, actually. Very small, a lot smaller than the previous islands we visited. Well, quite particular. The runway is definitely short, and it is very much upslope, downslope, depending from which side you take it. So this runway will be the shortest that we've seen so far, 1,600 meters only. That's 5,300 feet, and it is very much upslope. So yeah, there's a difference of around 45 feet between the bottom and the top on a relatively short runway. Now the approaches can be from the north or from the south. Here there is no terrain, so terrain this time is not a concern. The main concern here is the lack of nav aids. Now there is no ILS, there's no RNAV, there's pretty much nothing. There's only a locator approach. Just locator, just to recap, locator is an NDB located at an airport, but it is an NDB, so it's a traditional NDB approach. This will be coded in the FMS of more modern airliners, so the plane will do everything up to the disconnection point over here, and then you will fly manually. Very simple to do it if it's coded in the FMS, not a particular challenge, but you can do it manually on VOR and NDB navigation if you want a little bit more of a challenge. So what you will be doing, you will come into Skopelos. You can decide to land from the north, and at which point you'll encounter a downsloping runway, or you can decide to land from the south, which is the one that I personally prefer, and then you'll be landing on an upslope. Now, VOR, SKP, we go outbound 203, so we work on a radial out of the VOR 203. At the VOR will be at 4,000 feet as soon as we leave the VOR. Well, not as soon. At 3 DME away from the VOR, we start the descent from 4,000 feet to 2,000 feet to be at 10 DME at 2,000 feet. I would personally be absolutely fully configured over here. Not only 185, but I will be at final approach speed, flaps full and gear down before the 10 DME. So then we do the turn. We have tuned the NDB 326 at Skiathos, and we try and intercept a course of 008 to the NDB. So if you tune your NDB correctly, you will have your needle pointing at the NDB. You want to make sure that you perform the turn so that the needle of the NDB point at 008 degrees. Actual point will be, if it's 09, 010, well 010, if it's 10, 9 or 5 or 6, it doesn't matter too much, you still be visual. Once you perform the turn, you start your descent to 1600, and here you cannot know exactly where this point is. There's practically no way. One thing that you can do, you can put in your fixed info page if you have it, the locator, so the identifier of the locator, Sierra Kilo Charlie, and then you will have this distance tells you where the disconnection point for the autopilot is. You will disconnect the autopilot at this point and continue manually. Now from this point is a classic 3 degrees descent. You're gonna do the last 5 miles down, 3 degrees descent. Bear in mind that it's an offset visual final, so you're actually not going straight onto the runway. At the very end, you will need to turn left and align yourself with the runway. As I said, it's an upslope and a very short runway, so this is the tricky one. You need to make sure that you're absolutely stable, good speed, and lined up with the runway, because the upslope is going to be tricky. Now, remember, you're going down on a standard 3 degrees, so that's not too much of a concern, but you need to start down the way I do the flare for an upsloping runway. It's pretty much the same as a standard runway, so maybe start it just ever so slightly earlier at 40 feet maybe instead of 30, but then instead of holding your attitude flat, which would make you slam into the ground, you just increase the attitude a little bit more, so the plane starts gently climbing instead of gently descending, and then you settle onto the runway. But do bear in mind, you have only 1600 meters, so not much space for a float. Now the way this is going to look, if we have a look at here, the VOR is here. So the VOR is on the tip of that big island, I would guess, yes. So you're going to be flying outbound from the VOR, pretty much. Let's have a look at the chart. Over here. Yeah, towards the open sea over here. And then the final turn will take you, it should take you, we can see that island there. It's not exactly, there's only one island. Well, why, there's a few more, but yeah, it will take you around this island over here. There we go. And then 008 towards the localizer. Pretty much you're going to be descending like this. Yeah, very close to the island. So you're going this way, very much offset from the runway. So at the end, you'll just be turning left, align yourself with the runway, and then land on the runway. Here the payware has as well simulated the fence. So this is a very famous point where people are plane spotting, because the planes come really low onto the fence with such a short runway, and it's a great plane spotting view. And that's it. Look how upsloping is the runway, so just be careful again on the touchdown. And this is Kiatos. The next airport is going to be Split, a very famous destination in Croatia. Then again, lots of tutorials out there, so I'll be relatively brief. You have a tutorial from 320 Sim Pilot on one of the two procedures available, and then you have a tutorial from myself on my channel from the other procedure. So you can pick which one you like. Now Split is over here on the east side of the Mediterranean in Croatia. let's see if we can have a quick look around. Split is the town that you can see down there, so a very famous holiday destination. And once again, the same problem with terrain. So coming down from that side, there's no problems. But coming down from this side, of course, you cannot do a traditional approach as you have this terrain. So you need to do a circle with prescribed tracks. So if we open up the chart, we can see there's a couple of different options. Either the RNAV visual for runway 23 or the VOR B for runway 23. So this is the one that 320 Sim Pilot did. You come from here, you go onto the VOR, and then it's just a simple turn like a classic circle to land. Otherwise, and it's all charted on this chart, so you don't need anything else. Otherwise, you can do the RNAV that takes you, instead of on top of the VOR, here further to the east, and then you don't follow this guidance, you can follow the visual approach guidance over here. So chart 19-10, and then you do the visual approach. Now I would suggest having a look on YouTube. There's a couple of videos of this particular approach, or at my tutorial itself, and it is quite simple. You set up for the RNAV approach. The RNAV approach takes you to Lassel initially. Here, if you do it the way I did it, you will be coming from the south. So you can do this approach via Ivuga. Lassel, at Lassel you'll be at 4,000 feet. You descend. There's no particular limiting terrain over here. So your final altitude is 2,000 feet. So I would make sure that you plan to be at 2,000 feet early enough. So here the way it tells you to do it is 4,000 feet at Lassel, then you start the descent at 3,000 feet by SP509 at maximum 210 knots. So here you'll start putting your first notch of flaps. Then you stay at 3,000 feet until Nurat. Now it asks you to descend from Nurat to Rorka from 3,000 feet to 2,000 feet. If you still need to decelerate, that's going to be very tricky, because from Nurat to Rorka there's only 3.5 miles. So you will not be able to lose that 1,000 feet and decelerate. So what you can do, make sure that you're fully configured at Nurat with your gear down and flaps full, then descend to 2,000 early enough. If you are on the A320, the 737, or anything with an FMS, be careful. Make sure you deactivate your autopilot early enough, otherwise it will start the missed approach procedure automatically here with a right turn. You definitely don't want that. So be before Rorka, fully configured at 2,000 feet. Deactivate your autopilot. Start this one, you won't have it. So at this point you turn to this chart over here from Rorka, and it doesn't even tell you what heading to fly, because from this point is very much visual with reference to the ground. So what you do, you can put yourself a fix info, so a ring on the fix info page based on the split VOR, because you should not cross the 4.6 miles ring. If you cannot put decimal, you can put a 5-mile ring. Make sure that you don't cross that, and you can have it on your ND visualized. I believe you start the descent pretty much from 2,000 feet here. This is a good help. It tells you the miles. So if you're 2,000 feet and the airport is at 78 feet, you need pretty much 6 miles to descend at a standard of 3 degrees. So you have 1.4, 2.3, that's 3.7. So you need another 2.3, which is gonna put you pretty much over here by the tip of this island over here. Here you start the descent, and then I'll show you now visually how to do it. The go around procedure at any point is just close the turn in and just fly outbound from the airport. Now the way this is gonna look, we are flying Let's have a look at this chart again. There we go. So the RNAV procedure will make you fly pretty much in the middle of this island. As you can see over here, you'll be flying towards this tip over here. And that's where Rorke, the waypoint Rorke is. So at Rorke, here you need to be at 2,000 feet. You need to be at your final approach speed. And here, from Rorke, is where your visual part starts. So you turn over here towards the tip of the other island, towards the beach and the mountains, and then you turn. There's a lot of visual reference. As you can see, here there is a road. This is the road, the highway, and you're basically flying on top of the highway. And I'll show you over here. Once you're on Rorke, you cut over here. You're aiming at the tip of this island and the higher part of these mountains over here. So you go straight that way. Once you're approaching the coast, you start your turn, and you can see here the highway. It's over here. So what you do, you start your turn, you start flying on top of the highway, you stay on top of the highway this way until this point. This turn over here, you can literally fly the highway and it will take you onto the runway. So you fly this left turn. When it becomes double carriageway here, you stop following and you're straight onto the runway. There we go. Our next airport is going to be Nice in Côte d'Azur. So we're in the south of France, facing the Mediterranean. And again, another very famous destination. Now, Nice, very, very, very famous. I'm pretty sure the vast majority of you will have flown into Nice. So we'll just do a little bit of a recap of the options that there are to land at Nice, because they are billions. It's very complicated to decide which one to use, which combination. That's the most difficult thing. Now, being such a popular destination, you will find tons of material online from pretty much everybody. I guess Flight Deck to Sim, 320 Sim Pilot, and V1 probably all flown there. Well, for sure, V1, even though he had a bit of an exciting end to his journey, so probably not the best to use as a tutorial. I have done a tutorial for landing on runway 22, and there is a short video of me landing on 04, but not a tutorial as such, while the 22 is a full tutorial. Now, as you can see, there is terrain everywhere. There are procedures. There is an ILS procedure to land on runway 04, but it is avoided as much as humanly possible because it overflies an area, a built-up area over here, that on top of being built up is built up by incredibly rich people. So they try and avoid as much noise over this area as much as possible. So the way it works, we just do it on the charts. No point flying around. Now, as you can see, when you open your charts, there is a lot, and it's very complicated to decide what does what and what comes after what. Now, to try and recap, you have basically two different approaches for runway 04 and one approach for runway 22. As we said, the ILS, as you can see here, the ILS overflies this area over here. So this one is avoided as much as possible. And of course, it would be no fun because it's a standard ILS. So we won't be using this for our landing challenge. The RMP is pretty much the same. You fly over that area, so it's not used very much. The two approaches that are used are either the RMP or the VPT. Now, we start with the RMP. That is the final approach. RMP A to runway 04 left or right, it doesn't matter because this is a final visual turn. And this is what you need, this one over here. As you can see, that built up area is over here. So by using this approach, you're not overflying that area. The same thing is for the VPT Alpha runway 04, sorry, for the VOR, the VPT is the continuation of that. The other one is the VOR Alpha runway 04 left and right. They are identical. One is a VOR approach and one is a RMP approach. So the choice of which one you use, it depends, is going to depend on which plane you're using. RMP for anything with RMP capabilities, or VOR for everything a little bit older. Now, the common point for these two is BISBO. So wherever you're coming from, BISBO is the start of the procedure. There will be a SID, a start, depending on where you're coming. The start will be coming from the west or from the east. And then there will be a vector that crosses very close to BISBO, and then you need to direct yourself to BISBO. At BISBO, very important for both of these approaches, the VOR, sorry, let me find it again. Oh, it's here. The VOR over here, this is chart 13-1, or the RMP, which is chart 12-3. Very important thing is that BISBO, you are at 190 knots maximum. Now from BISBO, you stay at 3,000 feet all the way up to Foxtrot November 04 Alpha, which is pretty much the equivalent of this one, 8.1 DME on the VOR. So you stay at 3,000 feet. Then you descend to the final approach, so the MDA here, which is 2,000 over the last 3.1 miles. So what does that mean? As we've seen in a previous approach, if we need to lose 1,000 feet, we need those all 3 miles. So we need to make sure that we are before this point at our final approach speed with full flaps and gear down. At this point, especially if you're using the RMP approach, I would suggest not to use. Now, if you have the RMP approach coded into the FMS, you can fly in LNAV VNAV on the 737 or on final up on the Airbus. But what it's going to do, here is going to start the descent. Because you need to lose 1,000 feet in 3 miles, it's going to be still descending when you're at your missed approach point here. And you don't want that. You want to be stabilized a little earlier. So what I would suggest is before this point to be flaps full, gear down at your final approach speed. At this point, descend as fast as you can. So if you're in the 737, keep flying in LNAV, but descend in flight change. While if you're in the Airbus, keep flying in NAV and descend in open descent. So you'll be down in less, because at that point with the gear down and the flaps full, you'll be able to get down a lot quicker than in 3 miles. So MDA, at this point, be careful, the plane will not level off. Well, we level off if you have set on the FCU or in the NCP 2,000 feet. Level off at 2,000 feet, and then the remainder of the approach is visual. So if you're doing the RMP, you're on chart 12-3. The next chart, the visual part, is going to be the 12-3A, VPT-A, runway 04 left right after RMP-A. So what you're doing here, you're at 2,000 feet. At this point, you disconnect. Before this point, you disconnect the autopilot, and then you fly manually. Here, it gives you the standard descent profile. So from 2,000 feet here, you continue descending on a 3 degrees glide path. You make sure that you have Charlie Golf Sierra as a VOR tuned, and then you cross-check your altitude with the DME distance from the VOR. So this is a continuous 3 degrees to 2000 here at 4 DME 1730, at 3 DME 1410. Now there is a trick to this approach. Well, it is the same identical also for the VOR. So this is the other chart after the VOR, chart 13-1 alpha A. That's the VPT, but after the VOR. So they both call VPT, but one is after the RMP, one is after the VOR. Same thing, your 2000, you have your VOR tuned here, check your DME and your altitude. They're absolutely identical, these two charts. It's just the only difference is the one refers to 5 DME from Charlie Golf Sierra as your initial point over here. The other one refer to it as the name of the waypoint. Okay, but it is the same. Now, one little trick here, you could go visual. So what you do, you descend on your 3 degrees. I would suggest putting an extender center line. Okay, so you just reprogram your FNC to show you the extender center line, and you can turn visual and then descend visually based on the PAPIs, whether you want left or right runway, your choice. Otherwise, you can cheat a little bit, but this is done in real life as well. You can tune the ILS. You can do, for example, a secondary flight plan if you have it, where you tune the ILS, and then you will be able to perform the last turn and to descend with your diamonds showing the deviation from the localizer and from the glide slope, and that makes it a lot easier. Otherwise, don't try and find information about when you need to start the turn. It's a visual approach. When you see the runway, look out the window and then make the final turn. Otherwise, help yourself with the ILS. If you want, you can do the other approach, which is the RMP for runway 22 left or right, which comes from the other side and is fairly similar. Over here, you have the visual part. It just comes from the other side of the bay. And for this one, you have the full tutorial on my channel. Now, if there is one airport that doesn't need any introductions and probably doesn't need any briefing at all, is Innsbruck, Lowy. So, there's quite possibly the most famous airport in, at least, for flight sim enthusiasts, so anybody who knows anything about aviation, really. So this beautiful airport in Austria, and it's one of the most challenging approaches for a variety of reasons. Here, the terrain, of course, is very, very dramatic. You have the Alps surrounding you. So personally, I decided to fly from Nice to here to make the most of the scenery, but absolutely stunning, beautiful. Now, you will find a plethora of material online on how to fly these approaches, so I will only do a very quick recap. You have tutorials from pretty much literally anyone. I've seen somebody that did a very good tutorial, a full briefing, was Black Box 711, I believe, a real Airbus pilot, and he has some fantastic material. But you have Flight Deck to Sim, V1, 320 Sim Pilot came here. A lot of people on my, because there's so much material on Innsbruck out there, there's nothing on my channel about the traditional circle to land to runway 08, which is what I would suggest you do. But there is a different one that British Airways used, is slightly different from a traditional. But basically, what the traditional involves, definitely if you're coming to Innsbruck, if you want to just put it down, you can come down a straight localizer approach onto runway 26 over here, which is pretty straightforward. Otherwise, you can do the famous circle to land. So you will be coming down from that part of the valley. Then before runway 26, you will be breaking off, going towards the mountains there, and then do a circle to land, coming back onto runway 08. Now, in terms of chart, what you're gonna need, you can decide what to do really. There's no rule. You can decide to do the RMP to runway 08 if you want to land on 08, but RMP are not particularly exciting because the plane does pretty much everything for you. So yeah, it's exciting because of the terrain you have around and because it's a higher than normal glide path. But apart from that, if you want to challenge yourself, the one to go for is definitely the visual, the circle to land on the runway 08. The way I suggest to do it is to come with the one of these stars, Nanit 2A, Salzburg 3A, or Tulsi 3A. They all arrive from different sides, so they cover pretty much anything from south, southeast to north. If you're coming from Nice, likely you come from Nanit. They all take you to the last point of the star, which is Rattenberg, NDB, so RTT, and then from there you start your procedure. Now the one to use that I recommend using is the Lock A runway 26, so chart 11-4. It puts you at Rattenberg over here at 9,500 feet. You go into an Adweek. Now the thing to remember about Lowy, you need to be fully configured. At Adweek, you can be flaps 3. You can be one notch from flaps full, but gear down at Adweek, because then you start a descent at a 3.77 degrees, which is very steep indeed. So you need to make sure you're definitely fully configured or nearly fully configured before coming down the glide path. Now, whether this is gonna work or not, it depends on the sim you're using, the plane you're using. So you can either be in final lap and use, now actually this is a localizer approach. It's not actually, but on some planes I managed to use final lap. On certain planes, actually you do get an ILS signal, which it's like in reality there is an ILS signal coupled with this localizer approach, but certain airlines cannot use it, certain can, so it's a bit complicated. If you want to make sure you're going down and you don't miss the glide path / glide slope, just go down manually. So before FF26, so your final point, you start a descent, and here of course again you have the indication based on your speed on the feet per minute. Then the way this works, you go down this glide path and then you level off at 3,700 feet. You have it here, so circle to land, MDAs 3,700 feet. As you're going down, make sure you do, well, Alt hold or push the vertical speed button in the Airbus, whatever you want, but as you're going down that glide path, level off at 3,700 feet. Once you level off at 3,600 feet, once you need to have this OEV localizer, which is the one that you're using. Make sure that is tuned on your radios, and at 4.2 DME you break off, you turn heading 230, and then just before the mounting you turn 260, 264, you stay all the way at 3,700 feet, and then you turn here. Okay, again I'll just show it very quickly on the map, but please do go and have a look and find some videos on YouTube. It's definitely the best way. You can see it flown in real life by flight sim pilots. Everybody does this approach. Now what we're going to do, we're descending down on the localizer, which is pretty much at this point 4.2 from the runway. We break off and we're heading pretty much on top of this. This is the ski jump. It's an actual ski jump. You heading pretty much toward this point of the ridge. You're going to be very low because you're 3,700 feet. So you're very low here. And at this point, you turn to be parallel to the ridge. You fly to the village here of Axum. You're still at 3,700 feet. And then here, at 3.5 DME from the localizer, you start your turn. And the point is even depicted over here. The church at Axiom, the village. Here in the middle of the village, there is a church. I don't know if it's Well, this is the Obex scenery, so they should have modeled the church. But anyway, I can't quite see it right now. But anyway, what you do, once you reach the church, you start to turn into this valley over here. So at 3.5, you start your turn, and the aim is to descend into this valley. You probably will be coming like this and descending like this. So you start your descent at roundabout an average of 1,000 feet per minute, 20 to 30 degrees of bank. You come round and you're aligned with the runway, and you continue your descent. And that is Innsbruck. Just bear in mind that the runway is fairly short and it's downhill. So the runway is only 2,000 meters, and you're going from I'm pretty sure it's on the sim. It looks more downhill than that. I don't think it's only 10 feet, but if it says that, it's only 10 feet. Anyway, it's only 2,000 meters, so make sure that you have your auto brake on maximum and you're ready to step on the brake, and don't float. In Innsbruck, you do not want to float. You want to put it down, because the missed approach procedure is a fair pain in the backside, of course, because of all the terrain and etc. If you have to do a go around, I would probably recommend to do not the full go around, because technically full go around will take you all the way back to Rattenberg at 9,500 feet. So just make sure you put it down, otherwise you need to get all the way out to the valley again. There we go. Enjoy Innsbruck. For the next airport, we are again right in the middle of the Mediterranean, on the island of Corsica. The airport is Calvi San Catherine, and it's a very, again, another very famous approach. I'm pretty sure most of the streamers will have flown there. In regards to guidance, I would strongly recommend a tutorial from Captain Joe, which shows everything actually as it is flown in real life. I believe he flew there, so there's full guidance, and that is definitely your best piece of information. So that is a fantastic, perfect tutorial, and explains everything that you need to know. So I'll just be very quick here. Calvi, as you can see here, it's in a little bit of a bowl surrounded by terrain. So you have beautiful beaches down there and the town, but for the rest, you are in a bowl surrounded by terrain everywhere. So of course the obvious approach will be runway 18, but once again that would be too simple for us, so we're not going to do runway 18. You have a selection of different approaches to land on runway 18. So you have over here localizer, RMP, a few RMPs. But what we're going to do is actually something that I need to show you on the desktop. There we go. What you're going to do is using this chart over here. You can find it online on Google. If you Google Calvi circle to land approach, you'll find this chart over here. So basically what you're doing, you are approaching on the localizer. So localizer runway 18, you are on 109.5 Charlie Lima India. So you keep this one, you descend on the localizer, and then here at 4.2, as you're descending down onto the localizer, at 4.2 DME, you turn to approximately 190, and that's approximately because it depends on the wind. You need to try and be close to this bridge over here. You fly all the way out while staying between 1,500 and 1,700 feet. Then once you're abeam the threshold, you straighten and you turn towards 180 for around 20 seconds. Of course, you'll be fully configured for the whole way down. And then you start the turn abeam a quarry. And then you start your turn and go to land. And you start the descent as well as soon as you're abeam the runway. So to recap this one quickly, let's go into the sim. So all you're going to be doing, It's coming, look how beautiful. And then that part of the town is spectacular there. Look at the scenery here. So you're going to be coming down on the localizer 4.2 miles before the runway. We turn heading 190 in that direction. We keep flying at 1,500 to 1,700 feet. Once we are abeam the threshold over here, we straighten, we fly towards the quarry, and we start the descent here as soon as we leave that side, abeam the runway. We start the descent towards the quarry. Not entirely sure it's 20 seconds. I found that certain speeds is less than 20 seconds. That doesn't matter too much, 20 seconds. Before hitting the mountain there, on top of the quarry, you start your descent. You will be very, very low on this ridge, on these trees over here. You need to be very low, otherwise you won't make the landing. And then you keep turning, coming this side, keep turning, low, and then you go on to landing. But then again, as I said, go and watch Captain Joe's approach tutorial. That's a really, really good one. If you're not stable, if you overshoot, if you undershoot, whatever, if you have any problem, it's very easy to go around here, and it's very easy to reset for the approach. So make sure you do that. The runway length is not too much of a concern. Here it's 2,300 meters, so it's not too bad. So you can chase a slightly softer landing without floating too long. And we're back. Now for the next airport, we're going to go to France. So now the last leg was in Corsica, which technically still France, so we are staying in France. Now the next airport is Lima Foxtrot, Lima Bravo, which is Chambéry, and is in Aix-les-Bains. Aix-les-Bains is an incredible place at the foothills of the Alps, and so as such, because of its location, terrain is very dramatic in the area. So let's have a quick aerial view of the area. This is a pretty large lake just next to Aix-les-Bains, and this is an overview of the area. As you can see, terrain absolutely everywhere, and that makes it definitely a very interesting place to fly to, but even more so, it's absolutely stunning place to fly to. Now let's have a look at the chart. Here we selected this airport to be part, of course, of the landing challenge, because it has a very, very steep ILS approach. So already the ILS approach is a little bit of a, well, you know, a challenge compared to your traditional ones, with a glide slope of 4.46 degrees, which makes it very steep. And then if you wanted to make it even more difficult, there's another circling with visual prescribed tracks to do. So if you're doing the ILS, well, relatively simple. Consider you have a glide slope of 446, so make sure that you are at the very least at flaps 2, and possibly flaps 2 or flaps 15 or flaps whatever is the equivalent of 2, so the second notch of flap. And then see, you could go down the glide slope like that, and then see if the plane starts picking up speed, put the gear down and slow down that way. Oh, sorry, a little bit of cough. You could be fully configured before going down the glide slope, and at that point not having problems slowing down. But again, if you want to throw a little bit of spice into the challenge, you could go and do the circle to land. To do the circle to land, you start from the ILS, so you just go down the ILS on the glide slope as it is, and then what you're gonna do, similar to other procedures we've done before, we're gonna break off from the ILS at a certain point. So we're on the ILS, which is 109.5 on a course of 175 degrees. We're going to level off at 1,880 feet, and then at point A, which is 2 DME from the localizer, from the ILS localizer, we're gonna break off to 135. So as you go down, these 2 points will be very close to each other. Now let's see if there's a, yeah, here to double check. As you can see, we need to level off at 1,880. So at 3 miles we'll be at 2,200. So at 2 miles we will be just slightly below that. So what we're gonna do, 1,880, that's where you level off, will be pretty much 2.5 DME from the localizer. So you're gonna have to level off and very quickly then turn to a heading of 135. You can be flaps full, or you can be flaps full -1 at this point, and that put the flaps down on the downwind leg. But basically you just turn a heading of 135, you fly for 2.6. Here there is no reference, unfortunately. In other approaches we're seeing, like in Tivat, you had a DME at this point, while here you don't, but it does tell you what the distance is. So you need to use your chrono, your timer. So that's why it's better to be flaps full as you go down the ILS, so you have a specific ground speed. So let's say you're doing 140, as usual. Just in case you don't remember, you take your ground speed, you divide by 60, and that number tells you how many miles per minute you are doing. So if you were doing 140 knots divided 60, we're doing 2.33 miles per minute. And then you calculate based on that how many seconds it's going to take you to do these 2.6 miles. As I was going down, when I tried, I was at around about 140. So that meant that it took me 67 seconds. If you're doing 140 miles, I'll do the math for you. It will take you 67 seconds to do these 2.6 miles. At which point, and anyway, before you crash into these mountains, you will turn to heading of 175, which is your downwind leg, the reciprocal of your landing. And then you will fly as soon as you turn this time, not after you leveled off the wings. As soon as you turn 175, you start the timer again, and this time will be pretty much exactly 1 minute. After 1 minute, you'll turn a maximum 150 knots. You'll turn back onto base and final. Now, if you aid, definitely draw, if you can, if you have an FMS on your plane, draw a DME arc of 3 miles around the localizer, around the Charlie Yankee localizer. So that will give you the point at which you need to turn. Well, before you need to turn, but you need to skirt literally the 3 miles DME arc. And then you turn around, and one thing that will be very useful is the road. So this is a road, the A43, so you can use a reference to the road in terms of where to fly the downwind leg. And more importantly, at point C, that's where you need to start descending. As you can see, point C, you start your descent, and that's exactly when you cross the motorway. Okay, now one extra piece of advice, of course, when you're doing these circling approaches, make sure you do, if you are in the Airbus, do your secondary flight plan on the secondary flight plan a straight arrival onto this runway, so at least you have an extended center line. But again, it's visual, so you shouldn't necessarily need that one. So remember, go down the ILS as normal, fully configured, 1,880 feet. You level off shortly after at 2 DME from the localizer. You turn left 135. You fly for, well, 67 seconds if you're doing 140 knots, and then you turn 175, fly another 60 seconds, then turn, and crossing the motorway, you start your descent at 3 degrees. This one is actually studied for slightly higher. Where did I see that? I don't remember. It's actually, but I'm pretty sure. Yeah, there we go. Intercept Puppy glide slope and descent with 425 feet per minute. So when you start descending from point C, from the crossing the motorway, the highway, make sure you don't go at 3 degrees because it's actually intended to be flown at 4 degrees. That's the only advice. Now let's have, as usual, a look at how this is done. We will be coming from that side. That's where the ILS starts. Let's try and speed up this a little bit. Okay, now I believe the ILS comes down this ridge over here. So you normally fly here, come down here. The 3 ILS, doesn't really matter which one you choose. The only difference is in the missed approach procedure. So you normally fly on top of that ridge, come down here, and you start going down towards the runway. So a couple of miles before the runway, which is pretty close to the runway, round about here, let's say, you break off. You fly over here towards the ridge. Once you come round about here, where the motorway is, you turn heading 175, which is round about there. You'll come here, and just here, just before this ridge over here, you turn, you start your turn. Turn right, keep turning, and as you cross the motorway here, just when you can see the motorway below you, I wouldn't go, in my experience, I wouldn't go on top of the motorway, but as soon as you can see motorway just in front of your window, then you start your descent onto the runway. And there we go. In case you get the altitude wrong or the turn wrong, you do your missed approach is pretty easy. At that point, you just fly back. You can fly back up the localizer and then do your procedural turn over here. That should be coded into the FMS, because the procedure for the ILS is the same, and then you try again. You can try again. The airport, the runway is 2,000 meters, so not much space for error. It's not extremely short, but 2,000 meters you start to be quite worried about running out of runway, especially that you're ending up in a lake there. So make sure again you don't chase a batter. You make sure you touch round about here, even before the aiming point. Try and anticipate a little bit so you have plenty of space to stop. And this was Aix-les-Bains. Have fun. And there we are, next airport. Now, anybody who has spent any length of time in flight simulation will probably be very familiar with this huge rock just in front of me. We are in Gibraltar. So Gibraltar, British territory in the southwest of Spain, an incredibly famous airport, mainly for one very strange fact. It's possibly, I don't remember if it's the only one, but quite possibly the only airport where there's an active road crossing the runway, and you have traffic lights to stop people being on the runway when they shouldn't be, i.e. when airplanes are there. Now, Gibraltar, really particular approach. Of course, one aspect is that the fact of the road. Another aspect that you're practically in the water, and there are no ILS approaches, because you can see you have terrain on that side. And well, you're gonna ask me why there's no ILS approach on the other side, and I wouldn't have the answer. But Anyway, you have visual approaches. So definitely the more fun to perform is the one from, well, the south. So landing, approaching from the south and landing from the west, rather than the one landing from east, which is pretty straightforward. And now the way we do this is relatively simple. So you start with this chart 18-1, so SRA runway 09 civil as opposed to military. You're gonna get into RIPRA. Now your FMS should take you all the way down to X-ray. At RIPRA, you have either you follow the guidance, or normally at this point they will give you radar vectors if you're flying on VATSIM. Then you go down to 1520 out to 5 miles. Over here, radar fix. And then you go all the way down to point X-ray at 920 feet. So just make sure you're at the point X-ray at 920 feet. And then from X-ray, you just turn visual straight away onto the runway by keeping descending from 920, I believe a 3 degrees path. Yeah, 3 degrees path. This is 280, but that's from how to descend from 5 miles to X-ray to the map, to the missed approach point, which is here. This is the M of the missed approach point at X-ray. And then you just turn right. Now, I don't know if that is simulated. The very peculiar thing about this approach is that because of that massive rock over there, you tend to have very strong winds. Probably it's not simulated, but as you can see, depending on where the winds are coming, there's a lot of turbulence. Okay, but particular thing is just making sure that you get the altitudes right. Again, you will be able to find tutorials and people having flown it. I believe V1 did it when he did the European tour. I'm pretty sure, and don't remember exactly, I'm pretty sure 320 Simpalot would have flown here at a certain point. I wouldn't imagine him not having it done. Now, bear in mind, of course, the runway is relatively short, 1,778 meters, so definitely make sure, once again here, you don't chase the batter and you just put it down, brake, full reverse, maximum brake, and that is it. So here there's not really much need to show it. You simply come in there from the open sea, you come down into this gulf, and then at a certain point round about here you start your turn and you start coming down and landing over there. Fairly simple. Again, the trickiest part of this approach is the winds, and if those are not simulated, it's not a very big problem. It's one simple visual turn onto the runway, and that's it. Have fun. And we are finally at the last airport of this tour. So Madeira, which is an island in the Atlantic Ocean, far away from Portugal, but part of Portugal, where there's yet again another one of, one of the most famous difficult approaches in the world. Very, very particular. What particular is the airport itself. If you haven't heard of it, it's one peculiarity. Well, it is on the coast. It's exceptionally windy. So the main difficulty of this airport is the winds, which are absolutely crazy. If you look on YouTube, you'll see how difficult it is to land at this airport. And then quite particular because the runway was extended from its original length with pylons. So a good part of the runway sits on an incredible amount of actual pylons. So it's quite a spectacular place to land at. Now, there is a lot of procedures over here, so there's a lot of ways to land traditionally at the Cristiano Ronaldo Airport in Madeira. But let's say, of course, we don't want to make our life easy, so you could choose to go down. If you were landing on 2-3 directly, which is the easiest one coming from the north, you could go down with a traditional RMP AR approach that takes you down to just 490 feet of NDA. Sorry, no, actually, that's with an RMP of 0.1. Yeah, so it can take you as close as 490, and the airport elevation is actually 190 because it's on that massive rock. You could do an RMP onto 2-3, but of course you don't come to Madeira to go and land on runway 2-3. You come to Madeira to land on runway 05 and do the circle to land. Now there are pre-baked RMP approaches again that take you down really close to the runway, but once again, not much fun in doing those. The two that we're interested in are depending on your aircraft equipment. If you're RMP equipped, you can do the RMP Alpha runway 05 followed by the RMP visual approach runway 05. If you're not RMP equipped, you can do the circling VOR initial approach followed by the final approach followed by the circle to land. Now if you're doing the RMP, very simple, you just let the plane do its thing. It can be either a 737 with an ALNAV, VNAV. You can try the 767 if you want in here. 747 takes a little bit of well, guts, let's say, and then you can finish with the RMP. So from the last point over here, of course, bear in mind here the autopilot would disconnect whenever you have these dotted lines. That's the autopilot disconnected. That's the visual part. So if you come in on the RMP RNAV approach, make sure you come here, you level off at this point. QFE validated the threshold. I don't remember. I've never done the RMP. But the RMP, okay, you need to be at 940. So you come down at an MDA of 940. So you do the descent as per this profile, come down to 940, and then from 940 you keep going. Oh, it's here. It was pretty big. I missed it. So you level off at 940 and you keep going 3 miles. Now, in terms of how to set that up, you could create a custom waypoint starting from the Mike Alpha 566 towards this direction, which is 219 at 3 miles. So you would know here when to start the turn. Or you can use your fixed info page, program in different ways to achieve this. And this is one way that you do it with the RMP. You could also input these waypoints directly. Input this one, custom waypoint. Input this one. You could even input this one as you have the coordinates. But of course, the more you do, the more fun it removes. The other way is doing the VOR, which, well, if you have an Airbus, a modern Airbus, or a Boeing, or anything with an FMS, again, it will do it relatively automatically, or you can do it the old-fashioned way. So you come down from Porto Santo VOR, get to Abuzu at 3,000 feet. From Abuzu, which is over here, you come down to 7 DME from Funchal. So you have this VOR tuned. You come in 7 DME. This is the DME to the VOR, and this will be, once you pass the VOR, the DME from the VOR. So you go down from 7 DME, you start your descent down to 1,000, down to the minimum, which is 940 again. On top of the VOR, you should be at 1430. It doesn't really matter. There is not much terrain, so you can go down to 940 pretty quickly. Once you're down at 940, you'll be at 3.6. DME from the VOR, there will be the missed approach. So that would mean that if you're not visual at this point, you will have at the missed approach point to start your missed approach if you're not visual with the runway. While if you are visual with the runway, you just continue and you do this 13-1 point B. So from 3.6, once again, make sure you're fully configured before doing anything visual. Gear down, flaps full, so you can, and your spoilers armed and your lights and everything, so you can just focus on flying. From there, you disconnect the autopilot, you stay at 940. This is a little easier than before because you keep tracking outbound the VOR, outbound 211 at 60 ME. Here you start your turn, and as you start your turn, you start your descent. It tells you, bear in mind, not at the very beginning, because JLO, you just need to be at 850, while here you're at 940. So you can probably start your descent pretty close to JLO. Now, if you have a good scenery in X-Plane, and I don't believe this is simulated in a Microsoft Flight Simulator, you have leading lights, so curved leading light system. And if you don't have it, you just follow pretty much the coast. Okay, very important, be careful with the winds here. I don't know again if they're simulated, the strong winds that normally are here, but be careful with the winds. But mostly be careful, there's a little bit of upslope. So the runway here has 146, so you have around about 45 feet of upslope. And with certain sceneries, it definitely feels more than that. So once again, the way this will be flown, if you're doing the VOR approach, as we've seen, and what is that? Oh, there it is. So the VOR should be, well, it's probably even simulated. That's the VOR station over here. So you fly over the VOR, keep heading out, level off at 940 feet. You keep flying out, and then roundabout. Here is difficult because the buildings are not really good there. Well, let's see if I can spot it. Yeah, it's where the coast. Yeah, it's over there. At this point over here, you start your turn, you come here, you start hugging the coastline, you follow the motorway again, which gives you a good indication of how to get to the airport. Continue following the motorway, and then you turn onto final. As we said, be careful, of course. Here you cannot be short. You definitely cannot land short because it's a huge sheer drop. But you need to make sure. Well, I mean, this is not too much of a concern actually, considering that it's an upslope. Be careful, don't slam in down, don't chase a very early touchdown here, because the upslope otherwise will throw you off for sure, and you'll end up planting yourself onto the runway. So considering that you have the length to do that, give yourself time to do a slightly smoother landing. You have 2,800 meters. So that's definitely plenty of runway to slow down, and you're also going upslope. So there's definitely not a problem in slowing down on this one. And this concludes the tour. So we left a very scenic approach for last. I would strongly recommend to, even if you're not following the all the airports as I planned it, if you're trying to do the whole tour, definitely leave this one for last, so you have to do it only once, because it's quite a long way from mainland Europe. And that's it, we come to an end. So I hope these short briefings have been helpful. I will try and link some resources as well on some tutorials made by professionals, simmers. And if you have any questions, head over to Discord at Danair Virtual and give us a shout. We'll do everything we can to help you get down on the runway safely wherever you're flying. Enjoy this month of challenge, and let's see if anybody can finish all 13 of them. But thank you very much for following, and see you next time.